Hi guys, and welcome to the fourth lecture for chapter 15. Today we'll be dealing with some of the solutions to fossil fuel use. Basically, we'll be looking over energy efficiency and energy conservation today. Now, the first thing we're going to be talking about is something known as clean coal. Clean coal technologies refer to technologies, techniques, and equipment which aim to remove toxic chemical contaminants from coal as well as other fossil fuels. Basically, we scrub the air emitted from coal in order to remove those sulfides, nitric oxide toxins, anything nasty that we don't want injected into the atmosphere or into the air that we breathe. Now, there are several ways to go about doing this. The most common are termed something called scrubbers, and we went over scrubbers when we were talking a little bit about air pollution. Basically, scrubbers are some of those devices which chemically convert the contaminants emitted by coal into non-toxic forms or simply physically remove the substances from the byproducts of coal so that when we emit exhaust, the exhaust no longer contains those toxic substances. In addition to using scrubbers or electrostatic precipitators or any other scrubbing mechanism to remove the byproducts from the exhaust, we can also there are also some other techniques that we can employ to remove some of these toxic byproducts. Second, we can dry out coal. If coal is still wet or has a high concentration of water in it, we can dry that coal out, which allows it to then burn a little bit cleaner. Basically, there won't be as many toxic compounds emitted. In addition, we can do something called gasification. Basically, this is a process by which coal is converted into something called synthetic gas or syngas using a combination of heat and steam, and in this way we can then burn that synthetic gas instead of burning the coal, in which case we reduce our emissions in that exhaust. Now, we should note here that none of these forms actually remove CO2. The only thing that clean coal technologies do are remove some of the toxic pollutants such as sulfur dioxide, nitric oxides, lead, mercury, any byproduct that's actually in the coal. It doesn't remove carbon dioxide, so it's not really helping us fight global warming. And in addition to this, a lot of coal companies lobby really heavily to prevent some of these technologies or techniques from ever being implemented. So in addition to having them not actually be that clean in terms of removing CO2, they also aren't even readily implemented simply because coal lobbyists will fight so hard to prevent these technologies from being implemented in the first place. Now, the next thing we're going to talk about is something called carbon capture and storage. Basically, carbon capture and storage involves the capturing of carbon dioxide emissions and then shoving them deep underground under a layer of rock or sediment to keep them from ever escaping again. So instead of emitting our carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, we are actually trapping it deep underground where it can't actually interact with solar energy and contribute to climate change or global warming. Now, this is being attempted by numerous electricity plants worldwide, and it's largely unproven. It's really hard to tell if stored CO2 will actually stay underground. There isn't really a way to monitor if CO2 is escaping from those underground chambers, and so it's really hard to prove if this technology is actually going to work. In addition, there are some serious risks associated with carbon capture and storage. Basically, shoving all of that CO2 into the ground can lead to some serious pressure buildup and can actually trigger earthquakes if it's done incorrectly. And so the other thing that we need to consider here is that is it even worth it? By shoving all of this carbon way down into the ground, it seriously limits the energy return on investment value of burning coal in the first place. So now, out of the energy that we get from that coal, we are using a substantial fraction of that to physically shove the CO2 deep underground. And in addition to all of this, this can't be used for automobiles. Carbon capture and storage can only be used for electricity generation of power plants. We can't exactly take the CO2 emitted from our automobile exhaust and shove it deep underground. There's just not the infrastructure to do that. How are you going to do that as you're moving quickly across the ground? So carbon capture and storage, in my personal opinion, is a nice idea, but it really hasn't been proven to be feasible in any meaningful capacity. In contrast with carbon capture and storage, two proven ways to reduce our CO2 emissions are increases in energy efficiency and increases in energy conservation. Basically, energy efficiency simply describes the ability to obtain or maintain a given energetic output while decreasing our inputs. This is getting more bang for your buck when you talk about output energy. If this were a car, for example, a car with higher miles per gallon fuel rating would be more energetically efficient because it can travel farther than a car with a lower miles per gallon fuel rating. So energy efficiency results often from technological improvements. Usually as our technology gets better and better, it usually uses energy at a more and more efficient rate, meaning that it can go longer on less energy. And by using less energy, we are burning less fossil fuels, and so we are reducing the amount of CO2 per given day that we are emitting personally. The second strategy are decreases in energy conservation. Energy conservation describes reducing wasteful or unnecessary energy use. So in a sense, it is behaviors that allow us to use energy more efficiently. So while energy efficiency relies on technology, energy conservation relies on our own personal behaviors. This can also be achieved as a byproduct of energy efficiency. If we use our devices or our cars as often as we did previously, and these devices are suddenly more energetically efficient, we are actually conserving energy and lowering our CO2 output just by maintaining our current behavior while we are using more energetically efficient technology. Both of these, both energy efficiency and energy conservation, help us reduce our consumption of fossil fuels and slow down our CO2 emissions rates. And we have a long way to go for a lot of these technologies. Cars and power plants lose about 2/3 of all of the energy they use just as wasteful heat. Fortunately, a couple of engineers figured out a great way to take advantage of all of this heat energy that's being lost as a result of generating electricity. In something called cogeneration, excess heat produced during electrical generation is actually taken and used to heat nearby homes as well as being converted into other forms of power. Cogeneration can nearly double the efficiency of a power plant. So basically all of that heat energy that we're taking as a byproduct of generating electricity can be used to heat other things. And so instead of nearby homes taking electricity and turning that into heat, homes can directly access the heat that's a byproduct of this electrical generation. And so energy efficiency of the power plant doubles simply by readily accessing all of this extra heat that's naturally generated. And so there are a lot of things that we can do to be more energetically efficient in order to conserve energy in the long run. And a lot of these things should be familiar because we just went over them in our climate change lectures. So examples of ways to reduce our energy expenditure are things like driving less, so using gasoline less, turning off our lights when we're not around, buying more energy efficient machines, and unplugging our machines when we are not using them, because even when machines are off, they are still sucking power out of power outlets. That's something that not a lot of people know. Now, not only does this save us money because it's going to lower our power bill, this also doesn't even reduce our quality of life. Just being a little more conscious about where we could be less wasteful in terms of our energy usage can increase the extra money in our wallets at the end of the month, and it limits our CO2 output. Now, when we talk about energy efficiency and energy conservation, automobile efficiency and fuel conservation are key here. Now, automobiles are a huge opportunity to increase our energy efficiency and increase our energy conservation. Take a look at the pie chart on your right over here, and you'll notice that almost 1/3 of the greenhouse gas emissions in the United States are caused through transportation. This is going to be us driving our cars to and from work or wherever, what have you. Now, around 2/3 of energy burned by automobiles or cars are lost as heat. So that is a huge amount of energy that is wasted. Instead of propelling us forward, it is simply being emitted as heat energy where it is immediately lost to the neighboring environment. So because transportation counts for such an enormous amount of the greenhouse gas emissions of the United States, this is a really big opportunity. Things that we can do to increase our automobile efficiency are, of course, driving less from a conservation perspective, or we can get better fuel efficiency. We can buy certain vehicles, so we can buy a gas electric hybrid vehicle, which dramatically increases our energy efficiency, or we can buy a fully electric car. Any way you slice it, automobile efficiency is key to lowering our greenhouse gas emissions. Now, there is one drawback when we talk about increases in energy efficiency as a result of technology, and this is something we really need to be aware of if we want to increase our energy conservation as well as lower our CO2 emissions, and that is something called the rebound effect. Basically, increases in energy efficiency have a tendency to alter human behavior. And the rebound effect is basically this tendency where observed energy consumption patterns tend to increase as energy efficiency increases. Basically, this will offset the gains. So an example of this is because we have more fuel efficient vehicles, people will drive farther. So they're still using the same amount of fuel and they're still burning the same amount of CO2. So because they are more fuel efficient, people will sort of compensate for this by using that technology more. Often this is due to the fact that there is a monetary cost associated with energy usage. Because gas costs money, we are kind of limited in how far we are willing to drive simply because we don't want a huge gas bill. So whenever we get a car that is more energetically efficient, we don't mind paying the same amount for gas. So we'll go farther as a result just because because our gas bill doesn't change. And so these changes in behavior, these tendencies to increase our usage of this technology as a result of it becoming more energetically efficient, can almost completely offset the gains in efficiency and the decreases in CO2 that come from the increases in energy efficiency. So the rebound effect is something we have to keep in mind so that we are not getting in our own way and offsetting all of these increases in energy efficiency and take advantage of these opportunities to decrease our CO2 emissions. Now, that is everything we have for these solutions to fossil fuel consumption, energy efficiency, and energy conservation. I hope you guys will join me for my personal favorite lecture of the fossil fuel chapter, going over nuclear energy. I'll see you guys then.